Good evening. Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Shalom. It's very late, I know. I'm sure some of you are thinking, is he doing late nights with Big Daddy Liberty again? No, I am not. But there is something I needed to get off my chest because I'd sort of been in, I was debating the whole day as to whether rather I wanted to chat about this, but actually, yes, it is quite important that I do chat about this. What am I talking about? Well, today was Global Parents Day. That's Global Parents Day 2021. And it's a bit difficult to be a South African who sees the need to commemorate that day in this country, given the absolutely shocking numbers when it comes to, the family unit in South Africa. So we're going to have a very brief chat, guys. It's not, nothing profound is going to come out of this. I might engage with some of you guys who are up this evening. Maybe as I say that, just a quick shout out to you guys who are awake. I've just come from a round of load shedding. That's rolling blackouts for those who aren't South African, where for between 2 and 3 hours a day here in South Africa, we have no electricity. Thanks, of course, to our socialist overlords who, true to form, are rationing electricity. Well, welcome to Socialism 101, where there's always shortages and then rationing of basic commodities. But welcome to it. This is vlog 102 and we'll be brief. I do see you guys in the comment section. Guys, as you're joining, just hit the like button, please. It really does help. Just hit the like button. It pushes the as I often hear other YouTubers say, it works on the algorithm. And it does get the video out, so I do appreciate it. So I do see you, Rizzo Gabrielle, Tracy Martin, Jesse, Jesse Ventura, Jesse Randolph. I see you, homie. Dylan, I see you, Jacques. Hey, Jacques, good to see you, man. Long time no seeing you in the comment section. Karen Vandervalt, I do see you guys. Okay, so as you probably read in the descriptor of this video, it is Global Parents Day today. It's Global Parents Day 2021. And for those of you who are BBL fans who watch my content, who interact with my social media posts, you will know exactly what I stand for. The 4 key values that I often talk about, which is faith, flag, family, and freedom. I'm going to repeat that. It's faith, flag, family, and freedom. These are the 4 values that I argue unite South Africans regardless of race, gender, creed, or even geographical locations. Every South African has a strong sense of, having their values be derived from their faith, whether you are part of the 97% Christian community in this country, or you're within the Jewish community like I am, or the Islamic community. Shout out to my Islamic friends. We all derive, or even Hindus, by the way. I mean, I grew up in Durban, and there's arguably the largest Hindu population in the country is in that part of the world. The commonality amongst us all is the values we derive from our faith. Therefore, I stand for people of faith. I stand for people who are grounded, are based, as I often say, deriving their values and their cultural norms from their faith. Faith is an important facet of those 4 F's that I talk about. The second, of course, is the flag. Now, when I say the flag, it's controversial to some because they go, well, I don't really like this new South Africa. It's pretty pop and it's pretty crap. Yes, I get that sentiment, but there's one thing you won't deny. South Africans have a very strong sense of patriot duty, or a very strong sense of patriotism, where I can almost argue this is the stock standard South African. The stock standard South African is the person who loves their country, loves this country, absolutely loves this country, but hates their government, rightly. Rightly so, by the way. Loves the country, but hates the government. And I think you see it in ordinary people, especially South Africans, if you travel. If you're someone who travels, I used to travel a lot before this COVID grift and the COVID mania. And you'd meet South Africans in airport terminals across the world. And just by hearing the accent, whether it is a thick Cape Town accent or a Joburger type accent or even a Durban accent, you light up, because the beauty of seeing a fellow countryman in a foreign land just excites you, it energizes you, it reminds you of why home is important to you. So the South Africans are deeply patriotic people. They love their country. The sad thing is we have a political elite in this country who are trying to divide us and break that spirit of loving the country or the flag that represents us. So that even if you're someone who doesn't love the South African flag, right? I argue to you, then find your flag, right? Find your flag. Find your flag that unifies those around you, so that you have that deep sense of belonging, that deep sense of patriotism, so that South Africans don't feel alienated, as is often attempted by politicians, and the political elites. Politicians will be the first people to say things like, oh, whites are settlers. Whites are 1652s, as I saw Eusebius Makeza proudly burst out on social media in reference to white South Africans, again, suggesting that white people do not belong here. That's the argument and the tone they take. Or they'll say something like, oh, Indians are inherently racist, as I've heard Malema say. Their very predisposition is, even though they have brown skin, he argues, they see themselves as not being black, and therefore are racist towards blacks and Africans in particular. This expression the ANC and the FF love using. Again, suggesting that Indian people, by virtue of his definition, don't belong here. Or coloureds, as we've had one Jimmy Money, a politician once say, argue that they're overly concentrated, he says, in the Western Cape. I can go down the line. Or a Jacob Zuma who calls black South Africans who don't think like he does clever blacks. Because how dare they disagree with the race nationalistic and socialistic agenda in this country? There is always a politician around every corner who is willing and able and ready to tell you why you don't belong because of one or other immutable characteristic, race being the most common one. So that they don't actually believe in the notion of the flag, of uniting people behind something that actually unifies them, gives them a common purpose, builds a sense of patriotism amongst them, and sees them want to fix the problems that we face collectively as South Africans. Politicians don't want that. It sickens them. It actually makes them physically ill to see South Africans united. Because then they wonder to themselves, how do I divide and rule these people? How do I keep them angry amongst themselves so that they don't pay attention to me, even as I steal blind from them? That's the modern politician. So that therefore, I argue faith is important. It gives us values that unite us. The flag is important because it gives us a sense of belonging, a sense of this is home for all of us. Whether you're black, white, Indian, or colored, it's irrelevant. This is home for all of us. Let us unite behind that flag that unites us, that gives us a sense of a patriotic duty to each other. And the third one I often talk about, of course, and the one that will lead into tonight's chat, is the family. The family is the single most important level of society than anything else. You know, I'm a classical liberal / libertarian, however you want to view that. You know, I talk a lot about the individual. The individual, we need to empower the individual. And of course, that's all absolutely true. But the individual is socialized. The individual finds meaning. The individual is edified within the family structure. The family structure is the first level of socialization and really authority that we voluntarily belong to. And I use the word voluntarily. You know, some of you might be like, well, voluntarily, you don't choose what family you're born into. Of course not. But often people find greater sense of belonging in a voluntary sense in the family. What do I mean? Families are often the vehicle through which we adopt people, for example, or we adopt children, to create a home for them, to create a safe environment for them where we can socialize the next generation. So families are critically important. They are the backbone of any society, and they should be, as an institution, the one level of society that should be strengthened at all levels of not only society, but also government. But is that the case in South Africa? No. It wasn't the case under colonialism. It isn't the case under, it wasn't the case, excuse me, under apartheid, and it sure as hell isn't the case today. And that's what I'm going to get into in tonight's show. So you've heard the 3 F's of the 4 so far. So it's faith, the flag, and of course the family unit. And the last one is freedom. None of these other 3 matter if there is no freedom. We don't live in a free society, a society where the individual and really families are given the space and opportunity to pursue their happiness. Humans will do anything and everything for the benefit of family, as I've always said, and of course, freedom. You have people around the world. And by the way, freedom is not something to be taken for granted. Most people in history have never lived in a free society. Freedom is something which is hard fought for and literally defended in blood and death. Freedom in this country was attained through the sacrifice of numerous people, many of whom who gave their lives. The vast majority have been given their youth to the attainment of freedom. It is a hard fought for attribute, feature of a modern society, one which I am willing to defend with life and death. Yes, you heard me. And no, I'm not going to say cheers like the politicians in Parliament. You ever seen that crap? Sip. Cheers. Screw that. But so that those 4 F's are the very values that I often talk about that I'm here to defend, to fight for, to spread into society: faith, flag, family, and freedom. But family is the one that I want to focus on tonight, because the family unit in this country, as I've argued while I opened up early on, has never been a level of society that has been defended or even advanced. It was under attack under colonial years, and I'll explain what I mean by that. It was literally eviscerated under the apartheid years, and today's government, the African nationalist government, the race nationalist government of the ANC, has no intention of rebuilding the South African family. So let me unpack this briefly, and we're going to be about 30 minutes at most, people. I'll be quick on this one, and I will get to some comments. Under colonial years, the system of governance was purely extractive. It was purely extractive, and it was extractive at the cost of, at a social cost. Let me be precise and cite an example. You know, one of the laws that the colonial government passed was the 1910 hut and pole tax. And I've done a bit of an overview on this one, in a previous blog, but I just want to quickly recap. For the purposes of extracting what was the gold discoveries, what were the diamond discoveries, what was the growing industrial base in the Transvaal, the colonial government literally embarked on a process, a systematic process of breaking up families in order to extract labor from those areas. So, for example, in Zululand, let me cite where I'm from. The vast majority of Black South Africans back then lived in nuclear families. There was a father, a mother or mothers, because they were polygamous households in some cases, and societies, especially traditional Zulu societies, were framed around the family and the clan. The family and the clan. They were nuclear families. So that this notion that you often hear today, that, single moms can do it, you go girl, go empowerment, we need to encourage single moms, is actually a recent phenomenon. Now, I'm not saying anything single moms, shout out to all the single moms who are making it work out there. I myself was raised by a single mom. I know what that is all about. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend as if being a single parent is ideal or optimum, when I often see, especially amongst friends, how difficult it is. When I saw with my mom how incredibly difficult it is, compounded by the fact that she was a single mom who was physically disabled. So I know how difficult it is, and I know why that is not the ideal. That actually a 2-parent household is the ideal. It's what we come from as Black South Africans. It's what we come from as all South Africans in real terms. And that colonial policy was one of the biggest influences in breaking that up. as I began to cite the 1910 hut and poll tax, which basically levied a tax or a poll on each of the huts in a traditional house homestead, the umuzi, as it's called in Zulu. And obviously, people who before had never had a tax imposed on them before had to now find a way in which they could earn the capital to pay this unfair tax. Hashtag taxation is theft. There's the libertarian in me coming out there. But taxes are such a corrupting and corrosive influence on society, because now you have these intact family units of the ubaba, the dad, the umama, and the children, feeling the need, the imperative, the boot on the neck of the state, the colonial state, to pay this tax. Guess what happened? Suddenly, young men were offered up to the burgeoning industrial centers in the Transvaal and other parts of the country. Men were sent, young men were sent to go work in these factories, to go work in these mines, in order primarily to make the money to pay these taxes, the hut and poll tax, for example. So that was the real genesis, that was the real beginnings, if you will, in this country of the migrant labor system. And the biggest cost it imposed on society was the breakup of the family unit. Because suddenly young men were removed, and fathers of the household were removed from where they were traditionally and were living as single men in compounds in urban areas in order to work in the mines and to work in the industrial, the growing industrial centers of this country. That was one of the first pieces of legislation, is colonial legislation that broke up the South African family. And it's seen, pardon me, it has seen successive generations of the normalizing that families have no men in them. So that you understand where this context comes from. So you understand why today's status quo of families growing up normalizing the notion of there being no men in the household stems from our colonial days. Of course, fast forward this into apartheid, which again, still dependent on a migrant labor system of that sort, and reproduced, of course, with young men generation after generation. You then saw the normalizing that, men leave the household in rural parts of the country to go work in urban parts of the world, in the mines of the urban areas, pardon me. And that some of these men, for instance, throughout the apartheid years, with the growth of townships now in particular, there was this normalizing of the notion that actually, even if you have a marriage back home, a stable family unit back home, you can come to the city, live in a township, and start a new family, and started without real moorings, traditional moorings, family moorings that used to exist. Marriage, for example, being one of them. Raising children in a homestead being the other. It normalized the idea that, hey, you can have these quick flings and just, live that urban life. Some of those men, for example, starting second or third families in the urban areas, paying little heedance to each of the to any of the two family sets. This is the things that apartheid normalized. And again, don't get me wrong, this is not to blame apartheid solely, it's not to blame colonialism solely, but it's for you to see the roots of why society looks the way it does today, and how politicians have played a critical role in the destruction of the family, the traditional family unit, because in that you then lost, for example, some of the values, the transmittal of language, for example, even religion that was traditional in, homesteads. Let me broadly call them homesteads, traditional homesteads. Let me cite myself as an example. My family on the paternal side of things is from a small, well, it used to be small, but still relatively small rural area called KwaMaphumulo, or Emaphumulo, which is near Nkandla vibes. That's where my rural homestead is. But my grandfather had to leave that rural homestead in order to find opportunity or to find work. And where did he move to? He moved to Durban, Mlazi, where I was obviously born and raised, but I've always straddled those two homesteads, the rural and the urban, the township. And that has effects on a family, that has effects on identity. So that was the reality for a lot of people. You could literally grow up as a young man having never really seen a father in a household because he had to leave to go work in the mines or in the factories or whatever the case may be. And you had successive generations of young men, particularly young Black men, being raised by women in a womanized or rather effeminate environment. And again, that has impacts on how young men are socialized. Massive implications on how young men are socialized. And that this entire social trend that has now grown and ballooned over the years finds its roots in the decisions of politicians, both colonial, apartheid, and today's politicians. And let me get into how today's politicians perpetuate this behavior. For instead of fixing the family unit, instead of saying, you know what, we will provide, especially if you're poor, we'll provide incentives for families living together. We'll provide, and I mean real incentives for families living, young men starting families. We don't see social policy that is geared in that direction. If anything, we're seeing this weird continuing trend now infused with other schools of thought like feminism and all that nonsense that perpetuates this idea that the status quo of broken families, of single parents is okay. Let me go one step further and let me bring up some stats while I'm here. Just to show you how big this problem has become. And I'll make the argument as to why today's politicians, the ANC government, makes no effort to repair this, which is why the social fabric of society in this country breaks apart. Let me just bring this data up. You know, if you're just joining, welcome to it. We're having a short conversation. I really want to unpack this notion of why the South African family is as broken as it is today, in light of today being Global Parents' Day. And with you joining just now, I was about to bring up the data of how history has an impact on today, and today's policy, bad as it is, has an impact. Look at these numbers, people. Let me begin at the top, at the ideal. My ideal, as I argued at the beginning of this, is children should be raised in a two-parent household because that's what we come from. That is traditionally who we are. I say this, for example, who we are as Zulus. We were raised back in the day in two-parent households. Well, two-parent minimum households. Because as I argued, you know, families back then had the ubaba, the dad, the father figure in the household, and your mom or your moms. But today, a mere 32.7% of children grow up in two-parent households. The minority of South African children are growing up in two-parent households. And in reality, over 67% of children in South Africa live either A, with one parent only, to which the most of that is 42% who live with just a mom, and 4% who live with just a dad. And a shocking 21% of children do not have either parent at home, are in child-headed households. That's 1 in 5 children in South Africa who are raised in child-headed households. What do you think that does to the social fabric of a country? And shout out to Stats SA, which is the source of this data. What do you think that does to the actual social fabric of a country? Think about your race, your upbringing, the importance of having parents who lay down the law, in inverted commas, who provide structure, discipline, who provide a warm meal, especially if they're working parents, who provide shelter over your head, who make sure that you don't face the wolves of society, the predatory society at times, predatory even so far as pedophiles out there, parents who care about you. And 1 in 5 of our children in this country have no parents. And why? Because I argued already the first root cause of it, which is the political decisions of colonial politicians, of apartheid politicians, and today's politicians who do not focus on the family, and who, even in the past, actively sought to break up families for the purposes of then industrializing South Africa. So I've just spoken about that. But why is it still happening today? Well, it's happening today because, to a large extent, you have a situation where it's twofold, as I argued. There are the influences of new ideas, which seek to normalize the status quo. Certain feminist ideals, for example, that argue, well, it's okay if a single woman is raising a child, you go girl power. Ignoring the sheer difficulty and the pressure that places on women, unfair pressure, by the way, and see certain men evade the responsibility, the moral and actual responsibility of raising a family, of becoming a father in a household, looking after your kids. Your kids take after you, but looking after your kids. It normalizes this. It seeks to create a new sociological language that normalizes the current broken status quo. Because the moment you argue for the family, oh, what are you called? Oh, there you go again, the right-winger, the ultra-conservative, the Bible-bashing, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, it's not Bible-bashing, it's not conservative, it's literally the ideal. Children fare better when they're raised in two-parent households. The data, the facts, the statistics bear this out. Children raised in single-parent households are more likely to become more likely to be, sorry, I'm trapped by my own sentence construction here. Let me rephrase what I want to say. Children in single-parent households fare worse off than children in two-parent households. The data shows this. When you look at people who are committing crimes or become incarcerated, a vast majority of them are people who are raised in single-parent households. If you look at people who, for instance, young women, more likely to fall prey to teen pregnancy, a lot of those young ladies are raised in single-parent households. Broken families produce broken people. I'm going to repeat that. Broken families produce broken people. At a sociological level, ladies, I don't know if there's any ladies in my in the chat at the moment. Think about some of the men you've dated before. The toxic men that you often hear the feminist types talk about. Ask yourself the question, who has raised those toxic men? Do they come from two-parent households? And invariably, I would argue, no, they don't. A lot of these toxic men, or the toxic masculinity we often hear people talk about, have a look at really what it's all about. Often it is men who have been raised in single woman or single mother households. Men who are raised in highly effeminate environments, who have a man's strength, but will literally act like a woman because they were raised by women. Shout out to Kevin Samuels, who's someone I watch on social media. He has a YouTube channel, and one of the phrases he often says is, single women hate dating. How's this phrase? Single mothers raise the kinds of single men. Single mothers raise the kinds of men that single women hate to date. And it's an expression he uses. And I have to agree. Why? Because we're calling it toxic masculinity, but really it isn't. It's actually men who've been raised in an effeminate environment. Men who have sorry, I'm thinking this in Zulu, so quickly translating in my head, but it's a man who's raised it's a man with a man's strength, but reacts in a feminine way. Between men understand limits very quickly. Men understand amongst each other, we understand limits very quickly. Why? Because there's always a low-level threat of violence between men. So we often then find more constructive, more social ways to interact, to find agreeableness and to cooperate amongst each other. That's why we do well in teams. Men like playing games that have a team structure, where there's a structure in it. Soccer, rugby, cricket. a very masculine environment. We do well in those environments. We do very well in those environments. I played rugby. I enjoyed rugby. And you'll notice in a lot of these teams, there's always a leadership structure because men respond to that. They respond to a team structure and a leadership role. There's a team captain, and the team captain makes decisions, and we all play a part in that. That's the structure because men understand. We cooperate because we understand there's always a low-level threat of violence amongst us. But women often don't have that. Women often don't understand boundaries for very obvious reasons. Some good, some bad. Let me cite an example so you know what I'm talking about. So I'm not accused of being a right-wing conservative misogynist. Yeah, you feminist types. Let me be precise. So I've argued men amongst each other, we understand the need to cooperate because there's always a low-level threat of violence amongst each other. And that often incentivizes us to choose to cooperate than to fight or to be in conflict. Women don't often understand that low-level threat of violence because they've just always been able to act on it. Women are vicious amongst each other at times. Why? Because if it does boil over, it often doesn't, the fights aren't really of consequence, with all due respect, ladies. I've seen some of your scrap-ups. But what's the point? And I'm making a lot of generalizations here, people. That's why I said it's a late-night chat. We're just chatting. I'm making a lot of generalizations here. But generalizations which are directly observable, right? Let me give an example of why I argue women don't have that low-level threat of violence amongst each other, and obviously don't see it. You can have a woman who literally weighs 55 kilograms. I don't know if you guys have ever been out to a club or something like that. You can have women who have literally women at a club. Have you seen a fight at a club? If two homies are about to tussle it out, and the girlfriends will often step in, like this tiny woman of like a 55 kilogram stature, very short, will run up to the other guy. Pardon me, a kombucha came back. A woman of 55 kilograms will literally get in the face and be all aggressive with a dude who is 120 kilograms tall as a lock, first team lock, and literally be like, I'm sorry, I laugh because I've seen so many of these instances. Or literally get in a man's face. Why? Because she's never been socialized in an environment where she understands that, men have the propensity to, if it gets there, to be violent. And again, I'm not saying a man will be violent on a woman. That's not the point. But we've also lived in a society where we've said that, right? We've told men, you do not become violent to women. And some women misunderstand that as well. With my 55 kilogram frame, I'm going to be in his face and be like, whatever, punch him up, scratch him up, and all that. Because they don't have that low-level threat that we have between us as men, that we understand the need, therefore, to avoid that and to seek to cooperate amongst each other. Tracy Martin, I see you. Sure, what clubs do you go to? Hey, man, I wasn't much of a clubber back in my day, but you would observe some of these things. For example, after a matric, the after party at a matric dance, tiny, and this is an actual case, tiny 50 kg, 55 kg chick came up to literally the first team hook lock and was just in his face, scratching, punching, knowing, of course, that as a guy, he's not going to hit back, but also knowing that in the notion that, women don't have that, let me leave that on there, just in case. People start thinking I'm advocating for violence against women. No, I'm not. The point I'm making here, people, is actually quite a simple one before I get too lost. Men who are socialized in an effeminate environment often then take on those attributes that I've just described of a woman, only that man is not 55 kgs, he's 100 and something kgs and has the strength of a man, but will respond in an irrational and violent way. And then they call that toxic masculinity, where I would argue it is a direct proceed of an environment where men have been raised by women, with there being no positive male role models in the household, either as a father or as literally a system of uncles or irazo, as we call them in the township, that old male figure in the township who plays a father figure to everybody. These are some of the effects, what happens when you literally break the family unit. When you break the family unit, and more pertinently, you remove the father from a household, it has social consequences, real social consequences. Let me take you to the Cape Flats in Cape Town. Ask yourself the question there. I don't know if there's anybody in the comments. I don't know if there's anybody in the comments who was raised or who lives on the Cape Flats. Ask yourself the question: how many of those young men you see joining the gangs have a father figure back home who is the figure who would naturally instill the discipline and say, hey, you don't do that, not under my roof? And that those young men are obviously seeking a male energy. They're seeking an affirmation from a male energy. And where do they find it? From the gangsters. The gangsters have wised up. Gangsters are very clever. They understand the sociological impact of providing that sense of wanting a male figure that affirms you, and they play that. They play that up. Excuse me. You see this a lot in, if again, I've spent 4 or 5 years in Cape Town because I used to live and work there, and a lot of my work was in the Cape Flats, and you see this behavior from these gang units, or these gangs, excuse me, not gang units, but these gangs who play up the come here for that brotherly camaraderie. Come here, we'll give you that fatherly role. But obviously the price of admission is a life of crime. Because they understand the effects of there being no father figures in the home, and how it makes it easier to suck up these young men who are impressionable and who are looking for that positive male, or in this case, not necessarily positive, but the male energy. So what's the bottom line here, guys, as I waffle away? What's the bottom line? You can trace all of these social ills. You can trace all of these social ills to the breakdown of the family unit, and of course the history which perpetuated that, and obviously still, in today's terms, still encourages it, because there's no policy that works actively towards rebuilding the South African South African father firstly, but also the family unit. I mean, these are things that we need to talk about as South Africans if we are to really build a society that mends the social decay that we're seeing. We need to have these conversations. And I know fellow classical liberals, they struggle with this conversation because they think, oh no, whatever works. And I argue, no, actually, the whatever works method is just it's not on. You want to see more two-parent households develop in the country, where fathers are brought back into the household, where fathers are raising that next generation, assisting the mom in the household. You want to see that. Social policy should encourage that. It really should. But maybe that's just my house. And I say this as someone who, on your average Saturday, when you go to shul or synagogue, you see Jewish families. Jews have a strong emphasis on the family and community at all costs. A very, very strong emphasis on that. And what is the spin-off? What is the effect of that? What is the benefit of that? Is watching young children being raised in very stable family structures, where things are done as family. You would expect today's politicians to be at the forefront. Again, let me repeat this. You would expect today's politicians to be at the forefront, recognizing what colonial policy did, recognizing what apartheid policy did. You would expect today's politicians, today's ANC politicians, to be at the front of fixing that. But are they? No, they're not. They don't give a hoot. In fact, policy still incentivizes the removal, or rather the ability for the father to stay away. And this is where it's about to get contentious. Oh, here comes the deep water. But social policy today still encourages the removal of the father figure from the house. There's no policy that actively encourages, supports the father staying in the household, which I've argued is necessary given our history. But instead, the state is still encouraged by politicians to play a father figure in the household by way of income, for example. A single woman who has a child out of wedlock can quite easily apply for a social grant, a child support grant. And again, before you guys freak out, yes, one might argue there is a need for it. But I would want to see a situation, for example, where a grant like that is also linked to encouraging the father being in the household for the sake of the kids. Like, forget the sake of the mom. Forget the sake of, what looks good for politicians, but for the sake of the actual damn kids. You would want social policy, you would want current welfare policy to be geared towards encouraging two-parent households. And there's many ways you can do this. There's absolutely many ways you can do this. For example, here's a random example. So I've argued before that yes, there is a place the state can play, that the state can play in supporting poor people. Of course there is. As a libertarian, I can easily and happily say that. But it doesn't mean that the state should provide that service directly. So here's a good example. And Tracy, you're speaking my language. I'm going to get to that just now. I've argued, for example, for if you want to radically improve the quality of education in the country, instead of the state providing that education directly by, running schools and blah, 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 the state could literally break up the education voucher, the education budget, the yearly education budget, and give it to poor families by way of a voucher. So that poor parents can be given the monetary value of what the state would have spent on education, because the assumption is, and it's a rational assumption, nobody spends someone else's money as carefully as they spend their own. So if you give the money to parents for it to be their own money to spend on the education of their children, by way of a voucher, of course, so you can't go spend it at Dion Wide or the local Shebeen, can only be spent on education, that parent would want to get the best bang for their buck. The best bang for their buck. And I could argue to you further, given tonight's conversation or topic, that you could even incentivize that parents, or rather children who are raised in two-parent households, poor as they are, would get a bigger voucher because of the family, the more stable family structure. That is social policy that is geared towards incentivizing the social outcomes that you really want, that are preferable, that are proven and are shown in studies and in data are more beneficial to children, i.e. a two-parent household. So that voucher would be available to all parents, all poor parents in particular, because you don't really need to give it to rich or middle-class parents. Leave them to fend for themselves. Focus on the poor. Don't focus on blacks. Don't focus on Indians or coloreds or whites. Focus on poor people. Empowerment policy should focus on poor people. I'm killing three birds here with one stone. But the voucher focuses on poor people. And that same voucher, albeit available to a single parent, you could incentivize two-parent households by saying, if you are in a marriage situation, in other words, a father and a mother in a household, the voucher is a larger one for you, for your child. That's what I mean when I say social policy, in a classical liberal sense, can incentivize the sort of social behaviors that we know are beneficial, that create better outcomes. Anyway, let me wrap up. and conclude by saying this. It's when you look at numbers like these, and I'll put them up on screen again so you'll see where this conversation comes from. It's when you look at numbers like these on a day like this one, which is, Global Parents' Day, where 67% plus of South African children are raised in a household that doesn't have two parents in it. That tells you that you're in a disaster situation. That does not bode well. If you look at the data, if you look at the statistics, it does not bode well for the future of a society socially. If only 32% of children are raised in a two-parent household, and then more shockingly, given that it's Global Parents' Day, more shockingly, only 1 in 5 children in the country, or rather 1 in 5 children in your country have no parents in the household, that should tell you that you are at a disaster level in a social sense, and that urgent reforms are needed. Urgent policy is needed, to incentivize the rebuilding of the South African family. And yes, classical liberals and libertarians can get into this conversation. We don't need to avoid these conversations. These are not conversations for conservatives only. There can be no free, functioning, prosperous, property-owning, and non-racial society if you do not fix the family unit. As I said, I know we talk about the individual a lot, but really we're a family society. And insofar as we are a family society, individuals will do anything and everything for the benefit of family. That's why social policy should be geared towards empowering the individual to form stable families. That's where children are raised in a better way. That's where children are socialized in a better way. Values are imparted to the next generation more efficiently that way. Our faith, our culture, our customs are imbued into a next generation better when you're in a two-parent household. And that's what we need to encourage. So that's my 2 cents tonight, guys. Let me know what you think in the comment section. This is something I'll be taking with me across the country in terms of the ideas around how we rebuild the South African family. I gave you a taste of that tonight. I know it's a bit of a long vlog, but it is a nice late evening chat. And thank you to all of you who are in the comment section. I really appreciate your engagement, guys. Please remember, hit that like button. I see the engagement is very good tonight, even though it's a smaller audience. But hit that like button, and as soon as the stream ends, please share this link. I want to get people's views tomorrow as they wake up and watch this, and I want to see what they say. With that being said, let me just quickly go through some comments here. Let me see if there's any questions in particular. Paul de Beer, absent fathers are the #1 contributor to criminal behavior and eventually prison. 90% of prisoners never had a father figure. I fully agree with that. I mean, this phenomenon shows itself in the data. It isn't me just waffling away. It shows itself in the data. Aniki Kruger say, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've lots of times stand amazed at a lady getting up into the face of a guy, but did not get a fat clap. Again, stemming from an earlier point I was making around how men have a way of socializing each other because there's always a low-level threat of violence between men. And I was making this point in relation to how what is often called toxic masculinity is actually the consequence of men having been raised in highly feminized environments, highly feminine environments, because of the specter of the single parent rate in this country, the single mother rate in the country. Having channeled the expression, single women, single mothers raise the kinds of men that single women hate. So that's expression I got from Kevin Samuels. Shout out to Kevin Samuels. Rabelani Nengwe Kulu. Asking, were you raised by both parents, dad and mom? Rabelani, no. As I mentioned in the beginning of the stream, no, brother. I was raised by a single mother, a single parent who was physically handicapped. So that's why I said, for as much as I'm arguing two-parent households are the ideal, I'm not saying that to inherently bash a single parent. I mean, I was raised by one, but I also have to be honest enough to say, having seen how my mom struggled, for example, to raise me, why it's not the ideal for single parents or for single moms to raise children. It's absolutely not the ideal for them. Tracy Martin making the point that I think I hopefully echoed here, which is, we should stop normalizing this notion. It's often the feminist types in particular, the sort of you go girl, you can do it type rhetoric that, places so much pressure on women to, you can make it as a single mom. When I'm arguing, it's an unfair pressure to place, an unfair burden to also place on single moms. Like, men, play your role. Especially my generation's guys. Maybe I didn't quite touch on that in detail. But with us now living in a very different society, one in which the guys can't harp on the past, for as much as the past has a big role in getting us to where we are right now of the single parent role. But guys today, especially amongst us as fellas, like, we need to play the role of saying, hey man, hey brother, you've just made your girlfriend pregnant. How about you put a ring on that? I'm in big favor of shotgun marriages. To say, brother, you got the sister pregnant. It's time now to buck up and to play that role as a husband, provider, and of course as a father. Big proponent on that. Maybe we'll cover that in some other topic on some other day. Because again, we need to rebuild the South African family. There must be a steely focus on rebuilding the South African family, encouraging men to stay in the household, women for you to play the role of saying, hey man, you need to be the father figure, the husband in the situation. Let's do this together. If we do it together, it's much easier. I see Conscious Caracal is on the line. Shout out to you, homie. I see you. Jacques, what does Jacques say? Big Daddy, get Juju to debate you. Yeah, pretty much. He'll just end up screaming and interrupting me. That is likely what will happen. Speaking about debates and getting people on the show, guys, I am working on allowing people to be able to call in to the show. So maybe as of next week, expect that feature where you can call in and we can actually start having chats on the show. Who knows? I might even be able to pull it off for tomorrow's Big Daddy Liberty show. Remember the Big Daddy Liberty show, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Let me just get 3 more comments, guys, and I'll wrap it up. Conscious. Yeah, I'd like to discuss the topic. Yeah, sure. Absolutely, brother. Let's set it up. Let me get to any other questions and comments here. Lots of St. Louis comments here. Let's see what St. Louis is saying. I think there's a debate between him and someone else. Tracy, I might end it off with you. There are fathers wanting to be in their kids' lives, but you also have women who are spiteful, playing mind games with kids. I'm sure that is the case in some cases. Absolutely. I'm sure that there are cases like that. But, and again, there's no but. I agree. But so I still say bad thing. I would argue that, whatever the individual cases may be is not the issue here so much as the broader societal and community conversation to be had around rebuilding the South African family unit. How do we do that? How do we get that in place? How do we build a faith, flag, family, and freedom type South Africa? And that's what I think tonight I broached the topic on and I sort of brought up. But with that being said, shout out to you guys for watching this video. Let me say good night to you. I really do appreciate it. It really was just something just after lockdown, after the blackouts, what do we call them in this country? After load shedding, I just wanted to just have a chat with you guys, up to whoever was awake this evening. Please hit that like button and share the stream, guys. Really appreciate that. And if you want to support the show, you'll find those details in the descriptor of the video. If you're watching this on YouTube, my super chat feature or function is back up, so you can always drop a super chat too. So that being said, thanks for watching, guys. Have a good evening. I'll see you tomorrow for the Big Daddy Liberty Show. And a reminder to you, as I sign out, that you should never trust a commie.